All right, well, welcome everyone. Glad you could join me today for this short webinar on Management Reporter for Microsoft Dynamics ERP Financial Reporting. We're going to be looking at some variations on the income statements inside Management Reporter today. If you have any questions as I go through stuff, use that Go-To Meeting Control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a question section and a chat section. I'll try to watch those as I go through this stuff today. Let me open those so I can see them both on my other screen here. So to get us all started, just want to make sure you know who we are. We are the MSX Group. We specialize in financial reporting, budgeting, and analysis software solutions, mainly in the Microsoft Dynamics area. And we also have rolled out our own version of these products for ourselves as well, called Prospero. We've been handling Management Reporter, Forecaster, and FRX for over 20 years now. All of us at the MSX Group were previously with Microsoft, and we handled these products under the Microsoft umbrella as development people, training people, software support people, and consulting. So we've been doing this for quite a while. If you need help with your installation of Management Reporter back at your office after this webinar, email is the best way to get in touch with me at noah.moseley@msxgroup.com. Just to make sure everybody understands what Management Reporter does for us, I just got this one slide here. This is our financial reporting package for all of your general ledger information. You'll be using Management Reporter for all of your income statements, balance sheet statements, cash flow statements, trial balance statements, and any other kind of supporting schedule that you want to pull together from your general ledger data. Now it is limited to general ledger data. It doesn't go out and pull in any information from any other subsystems, like it does not pull from payroll, it does not pull from fixed assets. It's just general ledger data. You can, when you run these reports, though, drill down to the account level of details, so you can see exactly what account numbers all these balances are posted to. And you can drill down to the transaction level details as well to see what makes up all those balances. And you can drill back into the general ledger and ERP solution from the viewer as well. Now, the only other data that we can get into Management Reporter would be pulling data from Excel spreadsheets. So some clients have their budgets stored in Excel spreadsheets. You might have some statistical information stored in Excel spreadsheets. So yes, you can pull that information into your MR reports if you need to. It's not, it's kind of dynamic. You still have to link to specific cell locations, but it does know if you want to pull from that Excel spreadsheets, whether you're going to pull January numbers or April numbers based on what period you run the report for. So as far as getting data into our reports for Management Reporter, we're limited to the general ledger data and from Excel spreadsheets. And don't worry about messing anything up back in your GL or in Excel spreadsheets. MR is a read-only product, so it doesn't push anything back into the GL, and it doesn't push anything back into your Excel spreadsheets. It's all read-only. So inside Management Reporter, if you change the name of an account for one of your reports, so maybe a row definition, it does not change that name of the account back in the general ledger. So don't worry about messing anything up back in the source systems. So I'm going to switch over and look at some reports inside Management Reporter with you. I already got our server up and running. Let me switch over there. And I'm just going to start simple, and we'll just build from there with different topics for these income statements. And keep in mind, a lot of the stuff that I'll be looking at inside these income statements, you can apply to other reports inside MR. So these concepts you could use for your balance sheet statements, cash flow statements, trial balance statements, and reporting schedules. So you can apply this to other types of reports. You're not limited to just income statements here. The one I'm starting off with is just a really simple, a short income statement, one column of year-to-date balances, and I'll look at that one and then we'll start adding to it. And I'll be looking at these in the web viewer today. If you need me to look at anything in the report viewer, just let me know. I can switch over to that application as well. So looking at the definition for this report, really simple layout there. Just in our row definition, I'll pull that up here on my screen. Nothing special in the row definition here so far. We are just having the list of account numbers over on the right hand side in column J. Pretty much, yep, all these are just segment 2 references, and in this demo database, that is our main account number. And I'll look at some later today where it's not just segment 2. And typically back at your office, that segment 2 would say like main or account or natural. We just have ours as a generic title there for segment 2. And when I look at the column definition for this report, I'll jump back to this icon here for the report definition, and this one for the column definition. This one real simple there, just puts description on the left, year-to-date balances on the right. The first thing I want to do is just show you a simple tabular income statement. So instead of just having that one column of numbers, maybe I want to pull my total rows into another column to the right. So for this tabular income statement, I'm just going to do 2 FD columns. And they'll both be the same, YTD and YTD. I'm going to save that. And right now, they would both show up with the same column of balances. And I'm going to reference column B and column C in my row definition. So I need to do my column definition first and reference these 2 columns in my row definition next. So I've got that saved. I'm going to jump back to my row definition. And let me go ahead and hide that left-hand navigation panel so I'll have more room to work with here. So we go to View and Navigation panel, just uncheck that. Gives me a little more room to work with here. All right, so I'm looking at my row definition. I want to handle all of my rows that pull back balances and tell it to either show up in that column B or the column C. So for the sales row, I want those account balances to just show up in column B. I'm going to use the column restriction option in column H here. And typically you don't have anything in column H listed. If you don't, that means that this row will show up in every column of the report. I'm going to say that for this row for sales, just show up in column B. Same thing for sales returns. Same thing for, well, I'll leave the underscores across both right now. Now the total rows, not net sales, I only want those to show up in column C, that right-hand column, just so it looks, stands out a little bit for us and it shows up in a different column. I'm just going to go through the whole page here, doing that for all my rows that have segment 2 references for column B and column C for the subtotals. Let's copy these down here. I'll have this run, then I'll come back here and we'll look at what I did to push those over again. All right, I've got my limits in column H. I'll save that report and let's go back to the report definition, run that one more time for us. I'm just going to change it so it doesn't have the account totals in there. Maybe it'll run a little bit faster for us. And when I run it, I'll just run it for my sales department, so maybe it'll run a little bit quicker instead of having to go through the entire reporting tree. Anytime you add a reporting tree to your reports, it does add a little bit of processing time to the reports. All right, so a little bit of cleanup, but I just want to show you how that I've got my rows that are pulling account balances in that middle column, column B. My subtotals should be over in column C for us. That way I have the subtotals on the right hand side. They don't show up in both. I'm going to go back and fix that net sales row. Cost of goods sold, I'll fix that one. And I'm going to do the underscores as well. I'll change the underscores out for this report. So inside Management Report, there's no preview option available. So anytime you run a report, you really can't be sure of what you're getting until you go out and generate it and see the results. See what I did here? I had put the C on the wrong row here. Just move that up. That'll handle net sales for us. Cost of goods sold should just be in column B. I think everything else was okay, but I'll scroll and see. I'll change the underscores too. That'll fix my net sales. That'll fix my cost of goods sold. Yep, and now I'm going to do my lines here, underscores. I've been using underscores since I started working with FRX and Management Reporter, which is a format code in column C for all these rows. Another option, instead of underscores, if I double click that field there, I've got line options, and the lines go all the way across the whole page for us. So let me use those on this example just to show you how that looks a little bit differently than the underscores. So line 1, you've got 5 line options in these reports. Line 1 is just that thin line across, then you've got the thick line across, dotted, you've got double lines as well. Okay, save and run that again, and we'll go sales and let that process for us. And my plans for these reports as I'm going through them will be just to add to this as we go through. I'll have a report where I'll put monthly balances in the left, description down the middle, year-to-date balances on the right. I plan to go through a report for departments across the columns. I'll look at also reporting units across the columns. We'll look at a forecasted income statement where half the year's actuals, the rest will be budget, and some other options there. Okay, so I went through, I fixed that where I had net sales on both columns there. So now that subtotal just shows up on the right-hand side. I changed my lines, so instead of underscores, they go across the whole page here for us, left to right. Just some formatting there. For example, for this one, this tabular layout, we use that one a lot in our MR Advanced class for our balance sheet statement. So you push those balances over to the right-hand side. I just use 2 columns of numbers here, and so I've got account numbers in the middle, totals on the right, but you could easily have as many columns in this report as you needed to and have these numbers show up, or limited to whatever columns you wanted to. And again, that was all back in the column definition, nothing special there. It was just a column definition that had 2 year-to-date columns, column B and C, and then in my row definition, I just told each row which column they should show up in. That was that column restriction in column B. And in column H here for column restriction, I listed out individual column references from the column definition. You can also reference multiple columns from that column definition. So I could do B, comma C, just separate those with a comma. You can also do ranges, just use a colon to separate the letters. So if I had 12 columns and I wanted this row for sales to show up in column B through M, I would just do B colon M. So you can do individual column restrictions, you can do multiple ones with separate those with a comma, or ranges with a colon. All right, let's take this one and look at a different column definition. So I'm going to go and do a brand new column definition for us. And typically when you build your reports, your description column is always on the left-hand side. This is just a quick one to show you that you're not limited to that. Column A, I'll put in an FD column for us. This will be our current month activity for actuals. Let's put another FD column on the left-hand side here for budget. I'm going to do on the right-hand side D and E, I'll do 2 more FD columns for year-to-date for actuals and budget. And our description column, every column definition you build has got to have a description column somewhere. It doesn't always have to be on the left. You can put it anywhere in here you want to. I'm going to use column C for our descriptions. Then I'll throw in some headers. Let's see, we need to pick the month here. I'll spread that across 2 columns, A and B. And anytime you spread a header across multiple columns, it automatically centers it in across those columns. And let's change the formatting to a box across that. All right, and it doesn't show up correctly on this screen, but when we run the report, it will. And then an A and B on row 2, let me put actuals and budget. And on the right-hand side, D and E, just going to hard code this so it's YTD, never changes. I'll put a box around that as well. Spread that across columns D and E. And then I'll put actuals and budget on row 2 for this one as well. Bold these. And I'm just going to save this Web 2 for this webinar. I'll jump back to my report definition. I'm going to switch out the column definition I'm using. Before I run it, let me look at the line set, the row definition. I'm going to take out all those references in column H. That's used for a different purpose. Don't want those for this example. Save that and jump back to the report definition and run that. And while that's running, you know, I don't have that left-hand navigation panel, but it's still easy for me to jump around to all my building blocks as I'm making changes here with these icons right here at the top. Jump into the row definition, jump into the column, jump into the tree, and then back to the report definition itself without even really needing that left-hand navigation panel. So, easy example here. I've got my description column down the middle. Don't have any budget numbers to show you, but you've got the budget column showing up. Got January on the left-hand side in a box, actuals versus budget. Year-to-date on the right in a box spread across those 2 columns, actual and budget. All that stuff was handled in our column headers. And description column down the middle. Just a quick example to show you that you're not stuck with just a description column on the left. You can put it anywhere in here you would like. Now, adding to this report here, I've got actual and I've got budget. It's just as easy to show us some variance calculations. So I compare my actuals to my budget. Let me actually go see where my budget balances are. So January 14, I'll fix that. Oh, budget 3 in 2014 is where all my budget balances are. So I will use that for my definition. Okay, and when I run the report, I'll actually run it for 2014 so I can see some balances there. in this dated database. Let's look at the column one before I run this. I was going to add some extra columns here. It's easy to add columns to your definitions. Just right click, insert those columns, pushes everything to the right. I'm going to add a calculation column. That's just going to take my budget and subtract out my actuals. So let's column B minus A. Now when I'm doing this, I am I'll put this as a variance column header. Bold that. Let me go ahead and change that first header row so that it's spread across the whole 3 columns instead of just A and B right here. Just double click, open that up, change that to column C. And then I'll do the same thing on column G for a calculated column for a variance. I'll just take my year-to-date budget, subtract my year-to-date actuals, F minus E. Change up my headers. Spread this over all 3 of those columns. Save those changes, and I'll run this and then come back and talk about the calculations for a minute. All right, so that's running. When I did the calculations in the column definition, I did budget minus actuals for both sides here. That will handle the calculation for every row. And if you're thinking about favorable versus unfavorable, this will handle expenses fine. The revenue accounts will be off, and I'll show you those numbers when that opens up for us. But we have at least got the expenses handled correctly. All right, so I added the variance columns on the left-hand side under January. I fixed my column header there, so it's spread across all 3 columns still in the box. Same thing on the right-hand side for my variance column for my year-to-date, and that year-to-date header spread across all 3 columns. All the calculations are correct for us down here. If I look at salary expense on the either side here, the same month, I've got budgeted $54,000. I've actually already spent $85,000, so I've got a bad variance, an unfavorable variance, so of $31,000 here. So that handles that correctly for my expense account. So any of the variances for expenses are fine. But now if you look at the sales row, I budgeted $1,743 for the revenue, but I've actually brought in less revenue than I budgeted. So you would think that variance would show up as a negative balance for us. Right now it shows up as a positive variance. So I've got an easy fix for that back in the column definition. And this fix will handle the variances just for any row that I tell it to specifically. And I'll show you that in the column definition and in the row definition how I fix that. Go ahead and close some of these tabs here. Every time you run a new report inside Management Report, it just opens up a new tab in your browser. I'll leave this last one open. So to handle the problem with the variance calculations for my revenue accounts, I'm going to use a print control option. So in column C for variance, print control, I'll double click. And I'm going to use the code that says XCR. Change sign if normal balance of row is a credit balance. So XCR, I'll use that for column C's calculation column and for column G. Now what the XCR code does, it says run the formula for this column for every row. And after you run the formulas, go back in the row definition and see if a row has a C as a normal balance on that row. And if it does, flip the sign of the calculation again. So if you look back at our row definition, every row that has a normal balance with a C, the XCR will flip the sign of that calculated variance again. So I've got a C for sales, C for sales returns. I'll also need a C for net sales and any other calculation row that involves credit balance accounts. So gross profit for percentage, at the bottom, net income. I do not need it for total operating expenses. That's all just expenses, but I do want to make sure I use it for net income. I'll save those changes and jump back over to the report definition and run that report. So that was the XCR code in the column definition. And if you want the XCR code to work, you also need to go back to the row definition and have a C for the normal balance on any row that it should flip. And typically that's your revenue or income type accounts. All right, so now if I'm looking at my variance calculations, it did not affect any of my expense rows. So salary expense, I still budgeted $54,000. I've already spent more than that of $85,000. So it's a negative or an unfavorable variance. That was fine. That was fine before we even did the XCR code. I did have that problem with the sales row, but now that problem is fixed. I budgeted $1,743,000 for revenue, but I've only brought in $1,727,000 in revenue, so I'm short of my budget. It's an unfavorable variance, so I've got a negative variance in that column. And the same is true for any calculated row that involves credit balance accounts, like net sales and net income. So a couple of quick ways there to fix that: tracking good versus bad variances from actuals compared to budget. That's that XCR code in the column definition, and the C's as a normal balance on the rows. All right, let's think about different column layouts here for us. So instead of actuals or budget or variances here, let's think about an income statement where every column is a different department. So I'm gonna go back, I'll close this out. And we're gonna do a new column definition. All right, so I will put my description column back in column A here. And let's just use 3 FD columns as an example for this. And then a calculation column in E to add them all together. So column E will just be a range adding columns B, C, and D together. So B colon D. Now, right now, every one of these columns will pull back the same amount of balances, and then we'll have the calculation that adds them all together. But B, C, and D, I want to have them limited to specific departments for this company. So it's easy to tie any of your columns of your reports to specific parts of your chart of accounts. In fact, you can limit it to any of your dimensions in your chart of accounts for this company. Column B, I'm going to go down to dimension filter, almost at the bottom here, and I'll double click that field. Now this brings up the dimension window, which is the same dimension window that you've got available in your row definition and in your reporting tree definitions. This gives you access to all the segments, all your dimensions you've got in this chart of accounts, and the account categories too. So I just want to limit this column B to a specific segment 1, which is department. I'll just double click, do my lookup just so you'll see my list. I'm going to take 000 as this first one, and then 100 and 200 as the next 2 columns. I'll widen this out so you can see this here for us. And I can't just type that into C and D. I could copy this entry and then update it, or you have to double click and go back into the lookup. It's going to be administration. If I just wanted to copy and update, I just Control C to copy this one, paste it to here, and F2 to update that from 100 to 200. All right, now my headers. Column B is actually where my sales, most of my sales are. On column C, I've got administration. And column D, I think, was accounting. Let me just highlight that row. I will bold it. They're already centered across that. And I've already got my calculation already filled in. That will be my total column. All right. Quick thing about here, I did widen these columns. Don't worry, that doesn't affect the how the report looks when it generates and shows up in the viewer. Even if I had this one this wide, it would not affect the output. In fact, I'll leave that like it is. I'm going to call this Web 2. Nope. Web 3. So right now for the column width, they all say AutoFit, so everything's going to be a little bit different. I'm just going to leave the description as AutoFit. I'll change the other ones to 18. All right, so even though column C is much wider than column B on this screen, when it generates, the column width field really determines how it looks. All right, so I'm going to save this, jump back to my report definition, switch out the column I'm using. I'm going to go with no reporting tree, and we'll run this. And again, I'm doing this for an income statement. You can use this for any type of report you build or any type of supporting schedule you build. Those dimension filters in the columns work for all those different definitions. All right, so that report ran. I'm still using the same row definition. I've got all my income statement accounts down the left-hand side of the description. I've got a sales department as one column all by itself. Administration has a column all by itself. So does accounting. And then I've got the total, just adding them all together. So it's easy to break out any of your dimensions into any of these separate columns. And keep in mind when you run this, if you're not using a reporting tree, you're just pulling from one company, which is whatever company you're logged into, or whatever company you've got your report definition set to. But easy to limit any column here by any of your dimensions or segments from your chart of accounts. And I just did individual ones. I did 000, 100, and 200. But back in that column definition, instead of just doing one number for each of these, you can still use wildcards or ranges for any of these references. So it's easy to summarize that data the same way you use wildcards and ranges back in the row definition, typically for account numbers. Now, dimension filters work out really well if you're pulling data from one company database. I would definitely try to start off with dimension filters if you're doing this type of report. But if you are pulling in balances from multiple companies, then you're going to have a reporting tree, and you may have to reference that reporting tree here in the column definition. So to do that, I'm going to erase these dimension references. And let's say that I've got those departments in a reporting tree, and I've got to use a tree because I'm pulling balances from multiple companies. So very similar to that dimension filter row here in the column definition, I've got a row here that says reporting unit, and this acts as a filter as well. So reporting unit in column B, I'll double click, and I will use a reporting tree that I've been using department. Then I will pick the sales department. Now, whatever tree you use in this first column, you've got to use the same tree for every other column here. And you've got to use this tree in the report definition as well. So I've got it limited to the sales part of that tree. In column C, I'll double click. I'll limit that to administration, which is a part of that reporting tree. And same thing for accounting. Save those changes there. When I go to the report definition, I've got to make sure I use the same tree in the report definition. Got it. And now if I generate this report, that's going to process for us, take a little time to run. All right, so same type of layout. I've got a column for sales, column for administration, and for accounting, but it's a completely different way of limiting or restricting those columns to specific data. Instead of a dimension filter, which is only good for one company at a time, I use the reporting unit filter. So you have to have a tree, and you can only use the same, you have to use same tree for every column and in the report definition. But that does come in handy if you're pulling in from multiple companies. I use departments here as an example, but think of it as a consolidation report where every column will be a separate company from that reporting tree. So you do the same concept to limit every column to a different part or different company in that reporting tree, and then you'd have a consolidation total on the right. All right, let me take us back a few windows here. All right, so back in the column definition, that was all about reporting unit filters, and we looked at dimension filters before that. So 2 easy ways to limit the data that comes back into these reports. Now, let me take us back to a different column definition. We'll go back to the one that was just one column of year-to-date balances. And what I want to do here is make a few changes to the row definition for you. So in the row definition, we've been using this for this whole webinar here. Column J is just limited to different account numbers. Segment 2 is our main account number, and that's what these references are for. But I'm going to add some rows here just to show you that you're not limited to just using account numbers in column J for your row definitions. Just going to highlight and right-click and insert some rows here. And in column J, let's look at we'll use expenses as an example. I'm going to say our expenses are from 5,000 through all the 7s. So segment 2, 5,000 through all the 7s. So I've got segment 2 equals a range of accounts 5,000 through 7,999. But I'm going to copy this down and let's do just 3 different rows here. Let's say that, and I'll add a header row above this section. And let's say this is going to be our total expenses by department. Just bold that one. All right, and our departments, this will be our sales department. We'll have an administration department and the accounting department. And a total. All right, so right now my 3 rows for my different departments, sales, administration, and accounting, and column J, they all have references for segment 2. I need to go back in here and tell each row here to only pull back references or balances from specific departments. So in column J, I'll double click, and segment 1 for that first row will be all zeros. You can see how that fills in that in front of segment 2 with a separate with a comma and a space. I'll do the same thing for the next two departments, 100 and 200. All right, let's save this. We'll run this report. Take this reporting tree out. Okay, and that's running. So again, nothing special in the column definition. It's just one column of year-to-date balances. I added this section in the row definition for total expenses by department. So I have 3 rows here, one for sales, one for administration, and one for accounting. And they're all, oh, there we go. So every of these rows here, sales, administration, and accounting, pull back the balances for those different departments and their total expenses. So you're not limited just to referencing main account numbers in the row definition. You can reference any of your dimensions or segments in the row definitions, any row of the report, just the same way as we did that in the previous report in the column definition. So if you needed a report that had nothing but departments down the left-hand side of your report, that's completely doable and easy done as well, because you can pull in all those descriptions automatically in the row definition. I'll go to a new row here. And if I go to edit, insert rows from dimensions, I'm going to change this up here so that instead of segment 2, I'm going to pull in segment 1, which is my list of departments. It's easy to pull those in for any company into these row definitions. And if I just have in column J segment 1 references for this row definition, somewhere you're going to have some balances for your main account numbers to make some sense here. You might have a column definition where you have a whole column as revenue, a whole column as expenses, and then a net column. Let me pull that one together for us here. This is going to be sales. This is not sales. This will be corporate. And we'll add a total row at the bottom. Okay. Sorry. Fix that text there for the format codes. Got my calculation for my range of row code references. All right, so here in my row definition, I do not reference my account numbers. I'm just referencing segment 1, my department codes. Sales through miscellaneous, and then a total. I've got that saved. Let me go back to my report definition. Now in my column definition, I'll just make changes to the one I'm currently using. I've got one column of year-to-date balances. I'm going to use column B as my revenue column, column C as my expenses, and D as the net. So another column for FD, year-to-date, and then a calculation in D, taking B and subtracting column C. All right, column B will be my revenue column. Column C will be my expenses. And then column D will be our net. Now if I leave this like it is, column B and C will pull back the same balances because I have no filter set in here. But I'm going to go back to that dimension filter option that I used previously. But instead of limiting it to departments, I'm going to limit this column, these columns, to account numbers. So in column B, I'll double click, and I'm just going to do any account that starts with a 4. Then in column C, I'll do all my rest of my accounts, and that's going to be my 5,000:7999. Now, if I leave it like this, my revenue column will pull back all the balances for revenue, but it will not flip the sign for us. Okay, so if you have account numbers in your row definition, you can use a C for the normal balance, and it'll flip the value or the sign of that row. There's no C option for the column definitions here, so instead what I'll do is where I have a plus here, I'll just F2 to edit that and make it a minus. So my dimension filter has a minus in front of it, so that flips the sign for that column. Quick way to fix that there. Let me save this. Then I'll go back to my report definition and let's generate this report. And I forgot to switch out my row. Sorry about that. And we're coming up on the top of the hour here, so I'll be wrapping this up shortly. So this example here, I've got my departments down the left-hand side. Those are listed in my row definition. Typically, it's the account numbers in the row definition, but we switched it up to be departments. And our columns, they're year-to-date balances, but I've got one column just for revenue. And it's good that the balance shows up in the sales department for revenue. And then all the expenses in the expense column. And you'll notice that the revenue shows up as a positive. It's because we changed that plus to a minus in the column definition for dimension filter. Otherwise, that would be a negative $1 million there. All the expenses are fine. They show up as debits or pluses. And the net calculations come out correctly. So easy to flip that where departments are in the row definition and accounts are in the column definitions. Management Reporter is a really flexible tool as far as anything to do with your chart of accounts. Any dimensions you've got or segments or main accounts can be referenced in any row of the report, in any column of the report, and any part of a reporting tree definition. It's really flexible how to use those references in any part of the reports. All right, I'll do one more report before we wrap up today, maybe a forecast report. I'll close out some of Windows here. I'll jump back to that same income statement row definition we've been using. The column, I'll use the same one, but I'll make changes to this one. So no dimension filters. And instead of year-to-date, I'm going to do periodic as an example here. Monthly columns. And I'll just use 6 columns here and a calculation column. All right, so what I want to do is, this is not going to be revenue and expenses. Column B and C, well, column B will be January actuals, okay? And I'll go ahead and put actuals over through column D, so February and March. And I'll spread that actual header in a box from column B through D. Column B, C, and D, they're all FD columns, are all periodic balances. Let me hard code those periods to 1, 2, and 3. And if I was doing the whole year, I'd have columns, all this hard coded from periods 1 through 12. Okay, but I'm just going to use 3 months as an example here. And then after we would have finished our 12 months, let's say that we want to start our budget columns after that. So I'll use column E starting off our budget months. Instead of actuals, these are the budget 3. And budget, I'll start that off with period 2 because period 1 would always be actuals. So I'll use 2, 3, and 4 here. Just copy the headers over for us. Make sure we spread that over in a box from columns E through G. And column H, I want to do a range calculation from B through G. And that's going to be our total forecast. Now I've got 2 rows in this right-hand column for the headers. I'm going to get rid of my underscores on the top one, so I'll just double click, get rid of that underline there, so it looks better for us. These period numbers are hard-coded for actuals. The budget 3 is hard-coded here, 2, 3, and 4. If I run it like this, all these columns will show up and the calculated total will show up. But I want to change that so that if I run it for a particular month, this column definition figures out which column should show up for actuals and which should show up for budget. So that is going to be a print control option. And I'll start in column C because column B will always be January actuals. The one in C, I'll double click. There's a pop-up box and a drop-down list. And there's 5 different conditional statements. If this conditional statement is true, the column shows up. For actuals, I only want the column to show up if P is less than or equal to B. P is whatever number I hard-coded for this column for the period, and B is whatever I ran the report for. So right before I click generate, I pick what period to run the report for. That's the B option. All right, I'll use that for all my actual columns, and then all the budget columns will be the opposite. Anything in the future. So that'll be the drop-down box, and there'll be the second option from the top where P is greater than the base month. And I'll paste that to all my budget columns. The total column on the right will always show up. All right, so let me save this. We'll go back and run this report. I'm going to run it for February. So I should have actuals for January, February. March actuals should be hidden. And budget, March and April should show up. So I've got, do it for period 2. Generate this report. Let that run. Okay, so I ran this report for February. So I've got actuals January and February, and then budget picks up with March and April, and the total forecast column just adds up all those columns on this page here. Now I did a range calculation for that total column. Don't worry, those range calculations do not pick up the values from the hidden columns. It only picks up the values from the columns that qualify and show up on this report. So an easy way to make an actual and budget report. So you've got a whole year of numbers. I only went through April, but you would go through and have all those columns for actuals and budget all the way through December, and then the total calculation that adds it all together. So easy way to have that pulled together. And depending on what month you run the report for, those conditional statements figure out which columns should show up, actuals versus budget, or which columns should be hidden. All right, we are at the top of the hour. I don't see any questions in the question box or in the chat box. I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping up for the day. Glad everybody could join me today. I appreciate you taking your time to be with me today. If you need help with your installation of Management Reporter back at your office, email me anytime at noah.moseley@msxgroup.com. We handle consulting services for Management Reporter. We offer training classes, and we'll be glad to help you out with any of your support issues. All right, until then, have a great weekend, and I hope to talk to you soon.